Hey folks, I wanted to talk a little bit about Assignment 2. We've been having a look at all of the submissions to Assignment 1, and we think that you all did some really great work as it comes to expressing a story using your visualizations. And you're really starting to get the hang of how to combine interaction design with data science to tell a compelling data-driven story. So Assignment 2 is a little bit more of the same. And I thought it would be a good idea, now that it's been published on Canvas, to go through the description a little bit and tell you about the kind of things that we are looking for. The first thing I should say is that Assignments 2 and 3 form part of the same major project, and that the assignment description for both actually starts with the same project brief. Assignment 2 is a concept presentation where you're supposed to show us what you're going to be working on and demonstrate that you know how it's going to work. And that one's due on in the week of April the 25th. And then there's the final project itself, Assignment 3, which will be building an article that includes visualizations and uploading it as a web page. That's due STUVAC, so the 5th of June, I think. But for now, let's have a look through the Assignment 2 description. So this introduces a little bit about the brief, the kind of data that we're going to be working on, which is climate and energy data. In particular, we're going to be looking at sources of energy, emissions generated by that energy, and the economic and societal factors that are influenced by energy usage per capita, etc. The problem that we have as a society is transitioning off carbon-producing forms of energy. We cannot say, it is unfair to say, that the problem is reducing the overall amount of energy. Some of us in wealthy, developed countries might be able to do that. There are certainly things that we can all do to reduce our energy a little bit. But the human race as a whole is still definitely going to increase its per capita average energy expenditure. And so it should. The story of the last 70 or 80 years has been the story of increasing standards of living worldwide. And with those standards of living have by necessity come higher energy expenditures. Those of us in the top 2 or so billion people, as far as income and energy expenditure and quality of life goes in the world, would be very, very mean indeed to try to deny the bottom 5 billion people in the world those same luxuries. So it isn't a question of getting everybody to use less energy, but instead a question of how to make that energy emit less carbon. It's a very tricky problem, but we have huge amounts of really quite detailed data on the subject now, and it's your job to go and look through the wicked problem of carbon emissions and its economic and lifestyle factors and see what stories you can tell. The first paragraph is largely talking about the brief. For now, we're going to skip down to the second one, to tell a story of your own devising using data about energy, its production, its usage, its emissions, and the economies and standards of living it supports. You can use any data that you'd like, although we have some pretty comprehensive places to start listed on the Canvas page. And this time, instead of making an infographic, we'll be making an article, like a piece of data journalism like you might find on the ABC or the New York Times. Both great places to go to look for examples, by the way. So it'll be a web page, a static page in our particular case, formatted as if it were an online article. That probably means multiple charts presented as part of a story supported by prose. We're setting a limit of about 1,200 words. I don't want to see anyone going over that. But that is about the limit of a non-technical article. Exposés and in-depth things tend to go a bit longer than that, but the average article communicated to the average informed person will not be pages and pages. So we want to see what you can do in quite limited space. Now, there is no limit on the number or size of the charts that you use to accompany those 1,200 words. I would expect you would have some, but it's difficult to say the right number of charts because charts can be more or less complex. You can create interactive visualizations with a lot going on. Maybe you have some complicated interactive thing that builds a lot of your story into it and you only have the one of them. Maybe you have a huge pile of comparison charts, each of them being quite small. There are a lot of examples of data journalism on the internet. I mentioned New York Times and the ABC as places which you can go to before, so you can definitely check those out. But if you just punch data journalism into Google these days, you get a lot of good examples. Moving on through the description though, It says here your goal is to use the skills that you've acquired in data visualization design to see if a small part of the wicked problem that is energy and climate change can be made more comprehensible. Use any data you like. There's a couple of examples there. You do not have to use those, not like in assignment 1 where you had to build on those. In this case, you don't have to use them at all if you don't want to. They're just a place to start. I also want to make sure that you don't try to tell the story of all of energy usage and climate change. Instead, find something specific within that. As it says here, what story, what perspective, what region, what data, are all entirely up to you. There's a bunch of energy visualization articles linked on the Our World in Data page. You should go there and check those out. They're pretty great. This will be submitted in 2 parts. A 5-minute pitch presentation to your tutor in the week of Anzac Day, that's the 25th of April, where we will not have class because there's a public holiday. So tutors will send out invites and you can book yourself into a slot to present to them one-on-one later on in the week. And that is a presentation of your concept and the data that you're going to present to execute on it. And then assignment 3, as I said, will be due on the 5th of June, and that's where you actually upload the web page itself. The Canvas page then moves on to the details of assignment 2, and I won't read through all of this, you absolutely should though, except to highlight this bit in the middle. The goal of your presentation is to show your tutor that your article will be feasible, in that it's based on real data that you know how to manipulate. So you should be showing some actual data-driven explorations where you dug into some sources of data, manipulated it, and presented it in maybe an ugly way, like it'd be some charts that you throw together in Excel, but to give us an idea of the kind of thing that you'll actually be putting in your visualization, even if it's not really in exactly the format that you want to make it be. And then secondly, it should be interesting, in that there should be some compelling narrative that's wrapped around that those insights in the data, and that communicates some insights to people that maybe they wouldn't have known otherwise. So to reiterate, your presentation is about showing a feasible story concept. It's feasible in that you know how the data will work, it's a story with it wrapped around a couple of insights, and there's a concept for how you're going to communicate that. And we think that that suggests a simple way to structure your presentation. You start by saying the story I'm trying to tell is X, just lay it out at a high level. Then you show your explorations of the data, show some real charts with real data in them that show that there's actually some insights in there, something to communicate. And then you move on to some sketches for what your designs will look like. Now these don't have to be powered by real data. These can actually just be a couple of lines on a page, but they should communicate the way that you are going to communicate your story once you've actually put the article together. Back to the assignment description, it says down the bottom here, you'll be asked to submit your slides to Canvas by that Sunday night, again 15 minutes past midnight, technically on Monday morning, but really Sunday night, don't get that wrong. The reason for that is so that your tutors have a copy of your assignment that they can refer back to and see how you've improved it when it comes time for assignment 3, but also so that everybody has the same due date. Tutors will be scheduling in presentations with people throughout that week because, again, there won't be class, and I wouldn't want those who schedule in a presentation for Tuesday to be disadvantaged relative to those who schedule in a presentation for Friday. So everybody gets their slides in. You will, however, just for simplicity, be presenting from your own computer. We're not going to grab them, download them, and share them for you. You still get to be the one driving the presentation. It's just a lot easier that way. Moving on, though, to how we will assess this presentation in particular. There's a separate set of these for assignment 3 that you can go read. 3 criteria that go into how this presentation will be marked: storytelling, design quality, and data science. So these are a little bit different to the ones for assignment 1 where we had that evaluation criterion in there as well. That will come back in for assignment 3. Always a good idea to dig into what you will actually get marks for, because sometimes it helps to play the game, right? We try our best in Deco 3100 to align what we are asking you to do with the real world practice of design, but every game has rules. To tell a story, it says here that you want to clearly explain what that story is and then show how you are going to tell it using sketches, early layouts, some dot points for the narrative, etc. And that you need to check that it is compelling, clear, and interesting. So that's 3 things that you can check off. Is my story interesting to people? is my story clear to people? And is my story compelling? Is it going to motivate people to think or change in some way? These are obviously things that you can check with your evaluation when it comes to a submission for assignment 3, but even with your concept, you can ask your friends and see if you're done along those criteria. For the design quality criterion, here we are looking for sketches. We are not looking for finished design visuals. Good sketches communicate a few key ideas. They just draw key lines and they leave the rest ambiguous, because you shouldn't have a full high fidelity idea of what everything else looks like at this point. That would be a bit premature. Pixel perfect precision can work against you. Instead, consider how you're going to communicate the main ideas. And as always, talk through the reasons why you do stuff. Justification and communication around why are a big part of how we get design done for reals. And then here's the new criterion that wasn't in assignment 1, data science. You should have actually explored the data for real and have actually put together some real insights from the data that you find out on the internet about this one. The key difference of doing conceptual design in the data viz world is that you actually need to do some analytics as well. There's no point coming up with a concept if you don't know what the data actually says. So you need to prove that your story is really supported by data. You need to show us the feasibility of your story by showing that it's real. And it's okay if your feasibility charts, the things that you use to communicate that your insights are really there in the data, are ugly or early or just quickly slapped together in Excel or something rather. They should be clear, but they do not have to be styled. You've got your sketches where you're trying to communicate exactly how you're going to put together your final thing, but first you've got your feasibility. That's your demonstration that it can actually be done, and those should be real, and they don't have to be nice. And as always, it's okay to be inspired by visualizations from elsewhere, by data or by charts. This topic has got a lot of coverage out there. It's not like I'm the first person to ask a bunch of budding data scientists to look at the energy and climate crisis. But you need to acknowledge your sources of inspiration, especially if they come with code, and you won't lose any points for being inspired. Recreating a visualization that you find out there and then referencing and saying that you were inspired by it will probably cost you a few marks for originality. If you do something that's been done 100 times before, then you're probably not going to get the highest score that you could. Of course, recreating a visualization and then not citing it as one of your references is stone cold plagiarism, and you will get caught. I think last year I ended up reporting, I think it was 29 cases of plagiarism across all of my units. So it really does happen, and we really do catch it. I think it is always critical, as I said, to actually understand the rules of any game that you find yourself playing. You should read the rubric itself. You can find it on Canvas on the assignment page. Let's dig into that now. The rubric for this assignment covers those 3 criteria: data storytelling, design quality, and data science. I'm not going to go through the stages for each of the grades here, HD, D, credit, etc. I'll just read out the definition of each scale, but I would encourage you to really look at these while you're doing your project, because this is what our markers, this is what your tutors will actually be looking at when they decide what mark you get. So, data storytelling: the student's ability to design compelling visual narratives using data, including the ability to develop and justify data mappings appropriate for the context. So in other words, you not just have to make stuff that looks good and communicates some insights or stories, but you have to have chosen the way you visualize those things in a way that actually helps for the context. And B, the student's design quality, the student's ability to recognize, demonstrate, and implement aesthetic and human-centered design qualities, including the ability to devise an appropriate design solution based on a brief. So this is about giving things that are good design, well-designed charts, well justified, although there isn't an explicit justification submission in this. Your justification should be in your presentation, and you need to show us that you have thought about what the design will look like and how, through its features, it will communicate what you want it to communicate. And then the third one, data science, you can ignore criterion D at the bottom there. The third one, the student's ability to manipulate, transform, and synthesize data into representations that can be used for visualization. That second bit about AI isn't so applicable here, but the rubric for each of these shows what you need to do to get each grade. In this data science example for the presentation, what we're looking for is how you explored the data and how you found those insights that will drive your story. So, some thoughts and some questions that we've already had. The first thought is 5 minutes is a really short time. No two ways about it. And that's really deliberate for us because 5 minutes is still longer than you will get to sell your ideas in the real world. Honestly, you get about 90 seconds before someone makes a judgment as you start flipping through a concept. If that person is your boss or a client or someone who you hope is going to become your client, you won't even have the whole 5 minutes. We tend at university to go for longer presentations and longer documents than there are in this subject, and we're hoping to prepare you in part for the reality of what it looks like when people aren't paid to listen. One of the questions that we got when people started looking at the data set is, what even are these numbers? Well, there happens to be on each of the Our World in Data GitHub pages that are linked to in Canvas, there are code books. You can click on the data itself and you can click on the code book. And the code book tells you what each column in the data means and how it's derived. Do we need to include Australia? No, not at all. You can tell a story about anywhere in the world. I know in the previous assignment I gave some Australian data, but that there even was only an example. In this one, I'm not going to single out any part of the data because I don't want people to feel that they have to focus on us. I mean, there are a lot of interesting stories to tell in Australia about climate and energy production and consumption, but I think that there are just as many interesting stories, if not many, many more, about any other country in the world or any other group of countries in the world. Which brings me to the next one. In the data, there are a number of different groupings of countries, talking about Asia or talking about middle-income countries and all that sort of thing. You can totally use those if they make sense for your story, or be inspired to tell a story based on one of those groupings. Definitely know what it is that you're looking at. You can go to the Our World in Data webpage and see how they define the different countries and regions that are used throughout all of their data sources. It's a really useful thing to have there. It must be acknowledged that there is not global agreement on the definition of certain national entities. There are a number of countries throughout the world that very recently, even in the cases of some places, or over many, many decades, have disagreements about claims about places in the world. Our World in Data are just a source. They have their own biases, they have their own reasons for the definitions that they use of various different countries. If you don't like those and you want to tell a story that uses different definitions, I encourage you to go find your own data sources. Don't come complaining to me if you disagree with the definitions that are used in Our World in Data. They're not my definitions, they're OWID's definitions, and they just happen to be a pretty good source of data. If that's not what you want, go find a different one. Anyway, those are all of the questions that I received about assignment 2 thus far. I'm sure there'll be more. I'll try and stay on top of them in Slack. And if there's a huge flurry of questions, I might put another video out after this one. But I'll see you otherwise in class.